with all of these climate energy stories, there's this narrative that the world is ending because of fossil fuel use, but then the renewable energy industry in particular is coming to the rescue, nuclear unwelcome. And one article that our friend Luca shared with us is by an interesting guy named Peter Diamandis, whom I know a little bit. And he's part of a group that I'm part of called Strategic Coach, and he's close to somebody who's a mentor of mine as well, called named Dan Sullivan. And anyway, Peter, among other things, wrote the book Abundance, and he's connected with Singularity University, and he founded the X Prize. He's done some cool stuff. One thing that's interesting about certain Peter and others is that they have a kind of selective optimism about certain things, and then a selective pessimism. And I would say the biggest pessimism is about climate. So there's this kind of narrative that, well, we're reaching the singularity, which is this point of infinite abundance and infinite capability. And yet, human beings altering our climate conditions through rising CO2 levels, like that's an absolute catastrophe that needs to end, and we can't handle that. And there's just this huge incongruity. I've never seen any of them really address it. And I think it's so my own interpretation until I see them actually address it is just that there's a huge amount of conventionality in the abundance thinking. There's something that they don't get about the fundamental nature, that the cause of abundance, which more broadly is the cause of human mastery of nature, which is even more fundamental than abundance, which is that we have this ability to transform a naturally dangerous and deficient planet into an unnaturally safe and abundant planet. And part of that is that we are very, very good at dealing with all kinds of different changing conditions, largely conditions that we create deliberately, but then also conditions that have nothing to do with us, and then also conditions that might be side effects, like changing conditions that might be side effects, like climate related changes. And so one other thing that's interesting is that Peter and others in this kind of realm have an extreme focus on renewables and not nuclear. And then this is one of the themes of this email, and I've seen other things by him and other people on this, and it's basically, yes, we are headed to this complete revolution where renewable power plus batteries is going to revolutionize everything in some sort of unprecedented exponential way. So Steffen, just share a couple of highlights from the email.
Yeah, so this has been the prediction that in 10 years you will not own a car, um, by Peter. So uh, just a couple of quotes. So the era of the internal combustion engine car is ending. And later, from here on out, it's all about electric vehicles and autonomous ride sharing. So from this point in time, right? So oil demand is predicted to peak as early as 2021, according to Bloomberg New Energy Finance, if that's a reliable source for this kind of prediction. And predictions are, of course, very hard. And he also says that EVs are set to electric vehicles are set to win by sheer economic advantage, and then he has some price tags like $80 cents or 80 cents per mile driven in a conventional car, and then a predicted 35 cents per mile in an electric vehicle. And this will then lead to, of course, a switch to a very natural market-driven switch to electric vehicles. So, and the yearly cost to operate is a fraction of the projected to become a fraction of the conventional car. And battery prices, of course, continue to plummet in this narrative. Something that I would question, but
Well, okay, let's I want to challenge some of these things
okay.
first. Okay, so first, we have oil demand is predicted to peak as early as 2021 according to Bloomberg New Energy Finance, and then some experts suggest it may have already peaked. Okay, why select that in particular, like Bloomberg New Energy Finance? Are they so if you look at them, I mean, this is a kind of, well, it's a Bloomberg project, but this is a kind of very, very speculative type domain where they hold these different kinds of conferences saying that a particular set of technologies, particularly renewables and battery technologies, are going to change the world. But this is not an organization with any kind of track record in forecasting oil demand. So it's interesting they're not citing International Energy Agency or the Energy Information Administration in the US, or different organizations with much more of a track record. And so this is, Peter's not giving the indication at all. This is kind of a crank prediction. I mean, it's at least a fringe prediction. I would call it a crank prediction. And then it's okay, sheer economic advantage. So part of this is then, are we getting an objective picture? So societally unacceptable for you to hold on to that old gas. Okay, that's one thing. That's one kind of dynamic, but uneconomical. So let's see, double every 2 years into 2025 and well beyond. I mean, okay, that there's this whole dynamic of exponential guesses, and one thing is that people throw around the term exponential so much, and one thing with different trends is that in a certain stage of growth for any for a given industry, you can see dramatic growth that looks like it will be exponential, but it's very, very rare that it will continue in that exponential way. I mean, it might be, like in a certain neighborhood, yogurt restaurants might grow exponentially for a couple of years, and you just think, oh my gosh, in a few years, everyone is going to be eating yogurt all the time. And then you think, okay, no, there are certain dynamics that are pushing that, and maybe this isn't going to happen. One thing with this point about the maintenance, which is an interesting thing. So I don't know whether this cost is legitimate in any sense, but what's not being mentioned here is the huge thing with EVs is the time that it takes to maintain it in terms of the labor to charge it and to deal with it, which is immense. And there was a pretty good story, actually very good story recently in the New York Times about somebody driving to Vegas and having to spend 5 extra hours charging the car. And just think about the value of human time and how inconvenient this is, as well as with the prices of these things not really factoring in how a lot of these cars are a lot less luxurious than cars at even lower price points. So there's just there's this very rose-colored glasses view of things, like, okay, I'm going to look at certain kinds of predictions, and then I'm going to only look at maintenance from a certain kind of perspective, and I'm going to assume these kinds of exponential trends. And then, yes, this is going to be this incredible revolution. Whereas in reality, right now, what's happening is car makers are losing a ton of money on EVs. And they're, EV price, another thing is EV price declines are hugely related to fossil fuels, because fossil fuels are being used to make them and to run them. So you need to keep that in mind. And anyway, they're losing a ton of money even at the current prices. They're having you look at Tesla even, which has a huge brand advantage over just about everyone else, and the huge problems they're having, to the point where people, some people are worried about bankruptcy, which I don't necessarily think will happen, but it's not this kind of panacea. And then you see there have been, certainly for the last decade, these very, very optimistic claims about how EVs were going to penetrate really, really quickly. So there's just this fascinating. There's the actual reality, which is that gasoline cars are still being produced more and more and more every year. Like, they're still growing, and yet there's this narrative. Oh my gosh, they're about to disappear, and everyone is making all their profits on the gasoline powered vehicles or credits that people making like gasoline powered SUVs are selling. So there's this, if you're going to make these predictions, it's not that they're impossible in some way, but you need to acknowledge the actual reality going on and not just have this incredible bias in favor of renewables and EVs. I interrupted you, Steffen. Other thoughts or facts that are relevant here?
Yeah, so just to give a bit of global context, I think last year electric vehicles had something like around a 2% market share. So that means that we are adding vastly more internal combustion engines or conventional cars compared to electric vehicles.
Wait, is
And
that
that,
is that of new sales or is that of
I think
total
that's of
sales?
new sales, yes. So it's a massive increase from 2017 to 2018. That's why this projection of doubling and doubling and doubling every year in sales. But it's still like a fraction of the total market. And that then necessarily means, if you consider like a useful lifetime of a standard car of about 10 years, maybe some cars maybe even more, then that's already locked in. With every year you sell more conventional cars compared to electric vehicles, you lock in that they will be around, because nobody will just crush their car, because even if a new electric vehicle would be like cheaper to operate compared to conventional, well, you already paid for it. So that's the 10-year. Okay, that's hyperbole maybe a bit, but even if this exponential sales growth would continue forever without saturation effect, which is incredibly unlikely for many reasons, even then it would take much more than 10 years projected from now. So this is a very rosy view of things. Even just the fact that we would agree with Peter on.
And so, just one reason to bring this up is that these kinds of projections are often coupled with demands for a whole bunch of government power, including support of restriction of things like the ability to produce and use gasoline. And there's this narrative, oh yeah, it's going to happen really quickly, and we know this, and we have this graph, and that shows it. And what I'm trying to convey here is that there is not this this incredible obvious trend. And if there was, then people wouldn't have to spend so much time evangelizing about it. It would just be really, really clear. Like, oh, it would be, Teslas would becoming more and more popular and profitable, and everyone would like it. As against what seems to be happening, which is that they've had a huge trouble with profitability, despite being like a lot less luxurious than many cars at comparable price points. And a lot of the early buyers seem to have been status related buyers, and sometimes the lure of that, and the alleged societal benefits, that kind of thing can wear off. So I would say that the insofar as, I mean, electric automobiles have they're definitely appealing elements to them, and it may be worth it, and you want certain variables to improve, and then for sure the autonomy variable is one that we want. And then if you have things like, well, tunnels, like Elon Musk talks about, like if you could have that, and then that benefits from something that has no direct emissions, that could be really, really cool. So there's this I think false alternative of, oh, you're an evangelist for EVs and you act like gasoline cars have no value and no future, or you just think, you sort of don't want any progress with battery vehicles slash electric vehicles. And no, what you want is you want human flourishing. So what you want is people to be able to use the best vehicles that they can buy for their money, for their purposes, and you want that to evolve in all sorts of ways. So we want these things to evolve, but we don't want laws in place where lots of people are forced to use overly expensive cars that don't meet their needs in the name of this EV push.